Welcome, everyone. I'm Justin Paperny with White Collar Advice, and it's really my privilege to welcome Rob Karmann to our channel today. Hi, Rob.
Hey, good morning, Justin.
Rob, we're really grateful that you're going to talk about your experience through the criminal justice system, how you found our team, but more so, we're going to go through something which is unique, in my opinion, something we haven't done before, which is go through the personal narrative you worked on with our team and do so as a teaching tool. We're going to talk about your story, how you got a phenomenal outcome at sentencing. But as I mentioned before we went on air, rather than use this as a 20 or 30-minute piece to talk about how great our team is, and if you want to say we're great, that's cool. But we really want to use this as a training exercise for people who are like you, who are facing a government investigation, who are scared, who at some point may get sentenced to federal prison. So thank you for joining us. Before I dive into this interview with Rob, please like and subscribe and provide any feedback. So Rob, before we get into your narrative, give us a minute or two on your background, your expertise, your education, and how you became immersed in the government, in a government investigation.
Sure. My background is I've been an accountant, an auditor, CPA, ultimately rose to the position of CFO at a renewable energy company. Later came to find out that it was a Ponzi scheme and it was a fraud. Had an FBI raid my employment December of 2018, thrust into the government investigation and the criminal court system for the first time really in my life, and navigated through a plea deal a year after the raid, and then just most recently, had my sentencing date a few weeks ago.
I know when you reached out to our team, right off the bat, you had done a lot of work because, as I recall, you said, with my wife, we've watched a number of your videos, but in the videos you mentioned it's not just watching, but taking action and doing the work. So help the audience understand how you decided to go from the watching to taking action and seeking help.
Well, again, I feel like I was privileged to have, really strong counsel. One of the attorneys I was working with was number one in his law class at Stanford Law, and they were working hard, but I just didn't feel, maybe an extra connection to them at the time. They were working through the details of the law and preparing me for, the statutes and maybe the high level stuff, not the real soft, emotional stuff that I was dealing with myself and my family. And so again, I stumbled across your videos and your channels probably through a Google search, and I connected. I mean, your team had experience. A lot of what you spoke to wasn't about the current process and getting wrapped up in the immediate day. But I remember you and your team were very adamant that today we're working on the day one when you get out of prison. We are working towards that, and you can't get caught up in anything else. You can't feel, woe is me. You have to take action. You have to get ready. You have to start preparing today. And my wife and I discussed it. And again, after having spent a lot of money on high-level $1,000 an hour attorneys, we really were looking for, like I've told you, like I've mentioned, I was looking for hope, like something for me and my family to hold on to, not just legalese and professional legal experience, but hope. And so we reached out. Had a great conversation with you personally. You were on the phone with my wife and I for, I think, close to an hour. And we were able to come away, like I said, with hope and with a plan and with thought that, we could really move forward no matter what the outcome, no matter what sentencing was. We needed to work forward to make the best possible outcome of not just the sentencing, but of our lives moving forward, and we did. So we were able to gather the resources and work with your team, and it was phenomenal. I will say, maybe not 20 or 30-minute plug, but your team's fantastic. They're very positive. They're very professional. They've got experience in what I and my team, my family are going through, and your team was very supportive. But they were real too. They were honest. They didn't give me, what I wanted to hear. They told me what I needed to hear.
Something I stressed on that first call, and I'll never forget this resonating with Rob. Not everyone has the budget for unlimited consulting and having our team travel out to spend time with them. And I stressed on that call, there's value in consulting, of course. Our team consults. You shouldn't pay for things like how to shop in the commissary, finding the best jobs. we give away books and videos and podcasts, all of that stuff for free. You just need to watch and implement it. There is value in consulting and learning how to hold a lawyer accountable and how to run a business from prison, no doubt. What I said to Rob was the investment that you should make, whether our team helps or not, is the creation of an asset of content. After all, Rob found our team because of some asset that we created online that compelled him to reach out. So in that call, we discussed creating an asset, which is very easy to measure. Sometimes consulting is a little hard to measure. I feel good, I feel better, I have a plan. With the asset that our team can create, and in a minute, we're actually going to go into the narrative that Rob gave to his probation officer and sentencing judge. It's very easy to define, is this best in class or not? Where can we make improvements? So Rob, before we dive into the narrative, do you recall when we began to work on the narrative in that interview process, was it cathartic? Was it hard to dive into decisions that you had made going all the way back to your childhood? I know you did that with our team member, Brad Rouse. Help us understand the process of creating this all essential asset, the personal narrative.
Yeah, it was. You mentioned it. That's a really good point. It wasn't easy. It was difficult. I feel as we move through life and we're kind of in our current situation, marriage, family, kids, jobs, you forget about the foundation, right? You forget about really, in some ways where you've come from, right? And in some ways that's a good thing because completely focused on your family and friends and kids and career. But it was difficult. And in some ways we reiterate throughout the document and also, in my sentencing memo and it's not an excuse. My background is not an excuse for the crimes I committed, but it gives a little bit of, a lot of background into who I am as a person, right? Not just a defendant, not just a case number, but an individual. So it was difficult. It was hard for me. It was hard for my wife to read it. It was hard for my parents to read it and realize, again, we all think as people come through life, you don't want to harp on the negatives, but the negatives are there. And again, the negatives in my life are far fewer than the positives, and I've been blessed and I'm really grateful. But there were some hard things that hit me as a youth and, hit me through my adult career, some difficulty with alcohol, some difficulty in unemployment. And yeah, it was hard. It was hard. It was a challenge to revisit it. But at the end of the day, as I talk about with this crime, I'm not proud of a lot of things, but I'm not embarrassed to talk about it either because it's who I am, and it's helped me now move forward.
So let's transition to the opening of the draft of this narrative. There may have been a change or two since then. As you see, our team worked with Rob to write the initial draft in January 2020 with COVID and delays. You can see how long this process can take to play out. This is a draft, but you get a sense of what we were hoping to accomplish. Rob, I'm going to read the opening, and I'd love for you to touch on it when you read it for the first time. Then I'm going to share my insights. You wrote, "I deeply regret and am very ashamed of my illegal actions in this case. I take full responsibility for my role in the DC solar fraud scheme that caused so much harm. I made horrendous errors in judgment while working at DC Solar's chief financial officer. This mess is a result of my irresponsible actions, and I will have to live with the knowledge that I only have myself to blame. Most importantly, I need to convey this message of apology and regret to all of the investors who were financially harmed by my actions." When you read that initial paragraph, what were your thoughts? Help us understand that.
Well, yeah, it's true, and it's really the heart of the matter. I mean, as you've talked about in your team, and acceptance of responsibility. It's not easy. I didn't get there, the morning of the raid in December 2018. I wasn't ready to accept full responsibility. I wasn't ready to understand my role, and I was making excuses then and justifying things. And as you get through the process and you realize, I mean, that's the core of it, right? That is, I accept full responsibility. I apologize for it. I regret, what I've put my family through, what it's cost me in terms of career and character and credibility, and again, just family embarrassment around the town and my kids at high school and my daughter in law school. Yeah, I mean, that's it. It encapsulates everything, that I am deeply apologetic and I accept responsibility.
Let me address some things in this narrative from the get-go, which makes it best in class. It's not that it's well written and all. It is well written, of course, but here are some things. Before we went on air this morning, I filmed a video after a run about a grandfather who's in prison for 6 months. Literally just posted the YouTube video. And in that video, I mentioned how he did nothing to prepare for sentencing. The only thing he did was say that he was the real victim here because he had paid the money back. If he had turned in a narrative, I can tell you it would have been, I didn't mean to do it. I paid all the money back. I'm a grandfather, first-time offender. Don't send me to prison. All of those things are really true for Rob. First-time offender, educated, didn't mean to do it, didn't wake with intentions to break the law. All of those things are true. But look at the messaging in Rob's narrative. Wasn't my children, losing my freedom, didn't mean to do it. He immediately, most importantly, I need to convey this message of apology and regret to all of the investors who were financially harmed. I'm not going to go through this whole narrative with you, whether you work with our team or you do it on your own. It is the fixation on the investors turned victims, the money that is lost. It can't be, I didn't mean to do it. My family is going to miss me. You know what a judge will say to you? If you were so concerned about your family, you shouldn't have broken the law. The messaging is crucial. Further, we reiterate, neither the prosecution nor this court should misconstrue anything they read here as an effort on my part to minimize my role in the offense. Please look at this as a way to better understand who I am, my role in these crimes. And that leads to the personal history we'll get in next, Rob. When we began asking you about your personal history, background, elementary school, your first job, did you think we were just wasting your time and it was fluff? Or were you thinking, hey, these guys are asking me for a reason? Help us understand that process when we really got into details that a lot of lawyers say, a judge doesn't care that you began working at 10 years old, man. Help us understand that.
Initially, I thought maybe it was sort of mining for gold, mining for that, that difficult relationship in your background that sort of gives us an excuse, for the criminal behavior, right? But I think as I worked through the process with Brad, and he's fantastic, as you said, it's extremely well written. But the process of the interview, the process of gathering the information, I felt like, and I hope I connected with the reality is that it was more of giving me a chance to be thoughtful and to think about my background and understand sort of, quote unquote, where I came from, and not necessarily mining for that aha moment of this is what we're going to use to get you off the hook. It was just to really understand, again, I keep saying it, but it was really important to understand me as a human being and not as a criminal, me as a human being and not as a case number.
It's valuable to everyone watching to get into specifics of backgrounds and the details because it helps separate you from other defendants. What I mean is you have got to understand the stakeholders in the criminal justice system, the prosecutor, the judge. The judge in my case, Judge Wilson, was the former fraud prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're cynical. They expect a lot of privilege, a lot of opportunity, a lot of wealth. In my case, that was kind of the case. I had never worked before. My only job, I joked, was as a baseball player. I didn't have having to travel and move and issues that Rob had. By telling the story, Rob isn't bulked in as someone like me. Rob is viewed as someone who had some heartaches growing up, some learning disabilities that he worked to overcome, whether it's ADHD or something else. So Rob, in sharing these details about your family, do you think it had an impact on the judge learning those details of your background and your adolescence and the type of student you were and what your parents did? Do you think that had an impact on your sentencing, Judge?
Oh, absolutely. My attorneys and even you and your team convinced me, communicated to me that at the end of the day, the judge was going to look at you as a human being and not to get discouraged by the prosecution, because the prosecution is really trying to make their case and they're pretty tough and it's hard to hear. And I tried to stay positive, but again, in honesty, I was losing a little bit of hope in the criminal justice system and felt like, man, the prosecution just doesn't get it. That's not me. They're just hammering me on this case, right? And at the same time, holding hope. And when I got into the courtroom for the sentencing, the judge, you could tell he had read my character reference letters. He had read my personal narrative. He commented on specifically, to the prosecutor that since the FBI raid, Rob's done everything we've asked him to do. He's continued his employment. He's continued to volunteer. He cooperated with other aspects of the case. He's done what has been asked of him, and he's a member of the community, volunteering. He knew me as a person. He knew my family. He personally called out my daughter at the end of this with a salutation about law school. He knew me, and he knew me because of the personal narrative and my very, very brief statement in court at sentencing. But the narrative and the character reference letters were huge. And it was undoubtedly something that he took into account with my sentence.
For those of you watching this who are going to work on your narrative, whether by yourself or with our team, I want you to look at two things that stand out here. In the penultimate paragraph, Rob wrote, "I had a lot of good teachers, coaches, and family members who taught me good values despite my rowdy conduct." And we all had rowdy conduct as a kid. There are people immersed in this criminal justice system who were not taught right from wrong, who did not have mentors and coaches. That level of authenticity, of honesty, bodes well for defendants. When Rob acknowledges that he was raised to know right from wrong, those things are incredibly, forgive me, let me shut the noise. Those things are incredibly impactful. Lastly, you see at the bottom of page 2, he begins to address and focus on the consequences to his family and his reputation. The understanding that my children will suffer as a result of all my poor choices is among my greatest regrets. The majority of people who begin to write this narrative or statement begin to focus on how their own life is imploding, all of the collateral consequences to themselves, their family, and their reputation. Do you notice how strategically it's not all the way to the bottom of page 2? Let's talk about that for a moment, Rob. Some of the collateral consequences of this, including losing your job as a CFO, and what you began to do before sentencing by way of work, and what you did and how that could have helped at sentencing.
Well, again, collateral. I lost my job as CFO. I accepted another position, still in accounting, as a controller. But when my employer was fantastic, also wrote a terrific character reference letter. But once the news of my conviction, my plea agreement, was public on the internet, he was forced to let me go. And so I lost that job and became clear I wasn't going to be able to work in accounting. So it was a big pivot. At the time, it was early in COVID. Very few industries were hiring, but there was a bread delivery route that was available. And I was not qualified for it. I had never done anything like it in my life, but somebody gave me a chance. And I started delivering bread. It's a job that I start work at 4 a.m. I'm done by about 2 p.m. And it's hard, physical, demanding labor, something I haven't done, since I was a teenager, probably. And it was not always easy to get up and not always easy to feel like that was where I should be with my background and with my professional experience. But I did it. I needed to provide for my family. I mean, it was really, it wasn't a noble effort. It was necessary to pay bills and to keep us in the house and to keep, a lifestyle that, you want to provide for your family. And so I stayed with it. And, it's worked out that I'm pretty good at it, that again, work ethic transcends whatever profession. If you show up and you work hard, people recognize it. And if you have a positive attitude, people recognize it. And I've continued this all the way through. And it was pointed out again at the sentencing by the judge, that I continued to work. I continued to work outside of accounting, and he gave me, credit for that, and maybe not in a direct way, but he acknowledged it. So yeah, that's what I needed to do, and that's what I had to do, and that's what I've done since early 2020.
The most important, there's a number of things defendants can do: cooperation, paying back all of the money, accepting responsibility, obvious. One thing that is understated or appreciated is the value of work. And I've said it a lot. You may be watching this video thinking, my God, how many times is Justin going to say it? I am going to say it as long as I film YouTube videos. There is such value in working. Besides the money, Rob's honest, where he says it wasn't a noble effort. I had to sustain a family. But there are prisoners. There are defendants. Someone may be watching this right now thinking, I wouldn't do that. I can't deliver food. I can't pick up a phone. I can't drive for Uber. I was a CFO. I'm educated. I can't do that. I'd rather sit at home and claim COVID's not allowing me to work. You have got to look for work. You have got to try to work and demonstrate to a judge you can begin to earn money as a law-abiding citizen. It's part of the reason. And in the end, of this video, we'll get into the ultimate length of a sentence, along with what some of Rob's plans are in prison. Coming back to this narrative for a moment, I'm not going to go through the whole history here of exactly what happened and what you did and why. You acknowledged it was a Ponzi. You kind of turned the other way. You allowed it to happen. Understand all of that. Let's talk a little bit about the reflections component of it. It's got to be believable for everyone watching. There are judges who will tell defendants, what you just said to me is not believable. You want to go become a substance abuse counselor, you're still an addict. It's the analogy when you get on an airplane, you cover your mouth first before you help anybody else if it's going down. You've got to help yourself first. Rob's narrative and behavior did a good job of demonstrating what he learned, remorseful. That allows somebody to become reflective and begin to lay out a realistic plan moving forward that's rooted in reality. So let's talk about these reflections for a moment, Rob, and getting them on paper, and just that process of reflecting and laying out a plan for the judge and how you think that could have impacted your sentencing.
Sure, and trying to look at the reflection piece. Is that the? I apologize, Justin.
No, don't be. This is great. We're doing it. Yeah, towards the end of the narrative. Again, this is a draft for everyone watching. There were many more revisions between this and the completed one, but you get the idea. We wrote, starting in June 19, I went to work at Prevent, a leading provider in the fire and health code industry. You had to leave that job. Then you talked about a little bit about your children, but then you wrote, I've spoken to a friend about working in real estate in the future. This is part of my long-term plan to make restitution payments as instructed. So even though you're delivering bread, you're beginning to think about other things you can do in the future that are really equivalent with your skill set, but also beginning to pay back victims. I find these reflections and laying out a plan to a judge to be very important.
They are, and again, I give you and your team all the credit, a lot of the credit, right? That you made it a point when we first met, and you and your team made it a point all the way through that we're not working towards just getting you a favorable sentence. We're not just working towards getting you a comfortable prison to be assigned to. We're not working on short term. We're looking on long term. We're looking on the day after your release. Like, what is your life going to look like? How are you going to hit the ground running? You have to stay focused, as you've mentioned. You have to have a plan. You have to stay structured. You can't take 6 months or 6 years off watching TV and lifting weights and playing on the softball team and expect that you're going to be released and be productive. Because if you're not used to staying structured and staying organized and having goals, all that boring stuff that us CPAs, CFOs do, you can't hit the ground running. You're going to be lost, right? You're going to take 6 months or 6 years of putting your feet up, doing nothing, and it's going to show. So ultimately, again, part of my reflection was, I've lost some things. Obviously, the ability to be a CPA, the ability probably to be a CFO or a controller, work in accounting. But I also have gained a lot of through this, which again may sound crazy, but I've gained a much stronger understanding of my character and who I am. I've gained a lot of strength in my family. We're closer and stronger now than we've ever been. My relationships with my friends and extended family are stronger than they've ever been. And I know I want to be productive. I know now if I can deliver bread for 2.5 years, I can do whatever it takes. And I've shown that example to my family and my kids, most importantly. And I know now that it's a tremendous loss for sure, being a convicted felon. But it doesn't have to be the end of the world. It's not going to be the end of my world. It's just going to be a slice, as Brad likes to say, a slice of my life. That's it. So that's really what my reflections are about, are owning and admitting to my mistakes and accepting responsibility, but realizing that there's a lot of opportunity ahead. And it may not be as a CFO or a CPA, but there's a lot of opportunity in my life, and I'm going to make the most of it.
I want to close with the final paragraph, and then we're going to get into the sentence you received, and then a few goals you have for prison. You've already touched on some. Your Honor, I would do anything for a do-over, but that does not exist. It is painful to face the hard truth about my own actions. I wish I could have learned these lessons without a felony conviction. In the years ahead, I plan to share my story in order to help up-and-coming accountants avoid my mistakes. When my family and I reflect on this difficult chapter, I hope it ends with reconciliation and newfound wisdom. Rob, not one time in this narrative do you excuse or blame somebody else. Not one time. And that is the hallmark of a well-written narrative. You focus on the victims throughout. This draft was 6 pages. I think the final version was maybe 8 or 9 pages. Whatever it is, you continually focus on your victims and you blame no one. So it's no reason you got a shorter sentence. Let's talk to the sentence. What did the guidelines call for, and what did the government ask for at sentencing?
Well, the guidelines, if you're talking about, kind of pre plea agreement, because of the amount of the fraud, the numbers were off the chart. It was probably 30 or 40 years I was looking at, and that's one of the reasons, obviously, that I entered into a plea agreement. And with the plea agreement, I was looking at 15 years maximum. Mm-hmm. And the prosecutors didn't come off of that. The probation officer didn't come off of that.
They wanted 15 years primarily because the loss amount was just so significant, correct? It was
$1 billion, correct.
Almost $1 billion. The guidelines could essentially bury you under that prison. You sign a plea agreement that calls for a cap of 15, and they're basically saying, hey, you're a good guy. You've been working. You pled guilty. You're doing the right things. But the loss amount is so big, we got to ask for 15 years.
Correct. It was already a deal, already a significant deal to get to 15. It was their opinion, right?
And what's interesting, you knew this when you hired our team, because there are a number of defendants who will say the loss amount is so big, the guidelines are like 40 or 50 years. They're doing me a favor at 15 years. There's nothing I can do to mitigate this anyway. Why waste money? I'm going to get the 15 years. So there's nothing I can do anyway. You could have thought all of those things, yet you still said, Justin, I may get the 15, but I want to go to sentencing knowing I could have done everything possible to prepare. You did that. And what did the judge tell you before he gave you your sentence? And what was the actual number?
Well, and they're part of the process. And again, your team encouragement, again, do everything you can for the best possible outcome, right? That's what I was looking for. And again, it was to do everything I could, but also to set an example for my family and for my kids, that I am doing everything and I'm not going to be a victim. So the 15 years, there was cooperation credit of 40%. So the one, I guess, the deal that the prosecutors were giving me was going to make it 9 years as opposed to 15. Mm-hmm. My attorneys fought for the 40% to come off of a 10-year, combining a couple charges, maybe more complicated than we need to get into. But they had proposed 6 years. So it was basically the prosecutors were asking for 9 ultimately. My attorneys were asking for 6 ultimately. The judge had some things that he wasn't happy with me about, one of which, I hadn't paid any restitution. So when we look at hindsight, again, with $640 million of restitution, I didn't think a couple $100 was going to make a difference, but it would have made a difference. It would have been another check in another checkbox for the judge to see that I had done everything. Even with
making a payment at times is relative to what you have, even if it's a huge number and even if it's just symbolic.
Correct.
I agree with you. Please continue.
Yeah. So I understand that now again. But even with that, again, he talked about me continuing to work. He talked about, he actually quoted from or cited from a character reference letter or two. He cited from a cooperation letter I got from an attorney when I had interviewed them on another aspect of the case, bankruptcy side of it. So all in all, at the end of the day, I really believe I did receive the best possible outcome. It was 6 years. He sided with my attorney. He listened to me and my personal statement to the court, which was brief, but again, was about accepting responsibility and hoping to move on. And at the end of it, when we left the courtroom and the prosecutor and my attorney were speaking and I came up, the prosecutor specifically told me, he said, you did yourself a great favor. He said, by accepting responsibility and not making excuses, you painted a great picture. He said, a lot of people stand up in front of the judge and they start making excuses about why and this and that. And he said, you didn't, you accepted responsibility. So again, from the personal narrative through the character reference letters, through my statement at sentencing, acceptance of responsibility, which you have stressed, which your team has stressed, which again, not at all times I didn't have complete faith in, but you come to, again, it's authentic. You have to believe it and you have to work towards it. And again, I was blessed and fortunate to receive, I believe, the best outcome for a $1 billion fraud. As the CFO, I was not going to get a slap on the wrist. There's just no way. So again,
for people watching, part of the reason Rob's sentencing statement was so brief is because he had done so much mitigation leading up to sentencing, a lengthy narrative, character reference letters. We didn't get into the pre-sentence report in this interview, but suffice to say, Rob was prepared for his pre-sentence report, including getting the narrative to the probation officer, asking the narrative be attached to the probation report. There are benefits to that in prison. Let's talk about prison as we wrap up this video. What are some goals that you have for your time in prison? I'd love for you to get it on the record, because someday you're going to be home, you're going to watch this video, and you're going to be able to say, I either did those things I told Justin on April 27th, or I didn't do them. So I want to talk about a few goals you have in prison besides watching TV for 12 hours a day and exercising for 12 hours a day and learning a second language, which is what a lot of people say they want to do. I want a few concrete goals for your life in prison.
And I definitely will. And it's accountability, right? That's another word that I've learned, holds great weight with you and your team. Again, I'm looking for, to come out of it with skills and with a mindset that's going to allow me to move forward. You mentioned, and it's in the narrative, that there's an opportunity to, pursue a real estate licensing and help a family friend with the real estate business. That, since the time of the narrative, has dropped a little bit, because I also had an opportunity to speak with the tax CPA. And again, that's a little bit closer to my background. And he said that if I gain some skills while I'm away, that there's a spot for me. He knows all about what's going on with me, but he says if you can gain some expertise in preparing tax returns, that you've got a spot at his firm. So that's one of the main things I'm going to work on, is working on the certification for preparing tax returns. But along the way, again, I believe I'm bought into your process. I'm going to develop a reading plan, and it's not just going to be easy reading that's going to kill time. It's going to be productive, project management, organization, thought. I've coached a lot of basketball, youth basketball, and I'm into team mentality and team building. So it's going to be some productive reading. I may sneak to the track for a little bit. I may sneak to the basketball court for a bit, but I'm not going to play on the teams, because my goal is not to become a professional basketball player or a professional softball player. And my goal is to come back, still organized and goal oriented and hungry, right, and ready to go get it. And so that's my plan.
Our team will be here to help the whole way. To the basketball for a moment. Yes, it may not be the best use of time, but also if you get hurt, you're never really the same, because healthcare, which should be a separate video, healthcare in prison on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like a 2. So I've had clients come home and say, I did everything you told me to do, except I got hurt. My knee will never be the same. I still have a limp. Because if you get hurt, you're laying on the floor. Prisoners can't pick you up. You're in a camp, which has fewer resources than the higher security prison. So people say, well, you ran. Yeah, I ran slowly around this dirt track. Okay. I wasn't jolting and moving. So I just can't have you getting hurt. Okay.
I agree.
But also, we can talk about that a separate time. Rob, what can I say, my friend? It's been a long journey. It's continuing. There's so much more to cover. We won't in this video, but I'm so humbled and grateful. Brad, Sam, Michael, me, we're so grateful you've taken the time to share your story about preparations, holding people accountable. And we're just so, I hate to say you're going away for 6 years, but your mindset, your willingness to prepare is going to make this experience easier for those that love and support you. And I really admire the way that you prepared.
Thank you, Justin. I'm happy to contribute with my story and with the background. And again, I thank you and your team. I encourage anybody that's out there that is considering just contacting Justin or his team, right? Whether you work with them on a limited basis or just continue to access the free content, it really did provide hope, and it made me and my family stronger through the process. So I thank you. I thank you and your team, and I look forward actually to working with you, going forward through the process and hopefully on the other side.
Sounds good, but thank you.
Thank you, Justin.